What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're going to be doing the review of the Adidas Dropset 2. So way back when, almost a year and a half ago now, shortly after I did the review of the original drop sets, Adidas had me on a call to help them with feedback on the upcoming drop set 2. I don't honestly remember what we talked about or what I told them, besides the fact that the heel rocker on that shoe was a little too crazy and that needed to change. But I hope that I said something meaningful to them, because the Dropset 2s are probably the sleeper shoe of the year. I do vaguely remember them saying that these were supposed to come out at the end of 2022, but it's now like way past the middle of 2023. These actually had come out maybe a month and a half ago now, so probably about the halfway point of the year. And I've been testing them since. Probably taking me a little bit longer to do this review because the Metcon 9s came out and the Froning 13s came out, but we're finally back on track with the Adidas Dropset 2 review. And I have to say that this is a pretty easy review for me to do because, like I said, these are the sleeper shoe of the year, and there's a lot to like about them. So let's first start with the upper of the shoe. So we have pretty much one single mesh piece throughout the whole upper, and there are laminated areas all throughout that mesh to give the shoe some kind of structure. What I really like about this upper is that it feels very light and airy. It's not overbearing, it's flexible, and it breathes very, very well. There's also plenty of room for your toes to splay. In the middle part of the shoe, there's no hot spots. This is, overall, it's a very comfortable fitting shoe. So going back to those overlays, you've got your 3 stripes on the side here, and a border that runs along the lateral side, goes over the metatarsals, around the toe, and then back through the medial side, and then you do have raised sidewalls here, and then that carries throughout the heel counter and then around the eye stays of the shoe. So it gives the shoe a very seamless look, aside from the fact that it does have very large sidewalls. Taking a look at the laces, they're really nothing special, but they stay tied very well. And then they go through these little loops that look like they would be attached down the sides of the shoe, but they are actually not. And then at the top eyelets, you have more holes for extra configurations. Say you had a higher instep, a lower instep, a fatter ankle, whatever, what have you. But I actually ended up lacing mine a little bit lower down because I do have a slightly lower instep. Around the ankle collar, there's a good amount of cushioning and padding on the outsides. I will say that the heel does rise up quite a bit on this shoe, which could be problematic for some people. For me, it has never been an issue. I've never experienced it rubbing, but that is just something to take into account if you have more of, like, I guess, a bigger Achilles or ankle area. You do get a little pull tab here with the Adidas logo. It says training right at the back there. And then the midsole of this shoe is a dual density midsole. It actually says so right on the side. So you have a softer forefoot foam, and then you have a more dense heel foam. It's not like a carrier foam or anything, and it's just blended throughout. And I gotta say, the feel of this foam is more on the responsive side, but it's never harsh, and it feels very comfortable underfoot. Another thing that I like about the way that they designed the outsole is that there's these little points at the forefoot to give you extended contact with the ground without making the shoe overly bulky. It's similar to the design that Nike uses on their Metcons to make the shoe have better ground contact without being too clunky overall. The outsole of the shoe uses their traction rubber. Has forefoot grooves for flexibility in the toe box, and then in the middle of the shoe you have the midfoot shank, which is the torsion system, which is a piece of plastic that snaps back and gives you a little bit more pop when you're running, sprinting, jumping, doing any kind of Olympic weightlifting movement. It's something that they had on their original Adi Power, and I thought made that shoe extremely responsive. So I really like that part of this shoe. The outsole is a very flat contact outsole. There's very little toe spring to this shoe, so when you have it on the ground, it's pretty much just flat throughout. So now let's talk about the sidewalls on this shoe. So the reason why you would want raised sidewalls is because it produces more stability and more structure in those areas. So if you're doing any kind of lifting movements, that wall just kind of protects you from spilling over the shoe and gives you that extra bit of stability when you need to torque into the shoe. Now the problem with some sidewalls is that they can be felt through the interior of the shoe, but that's not an issue with the drop sets. I found that there was no hot spots created from it. The middle part of the shoe actually has a good amount of width, so if you have collapsed arches, you're gonna be fine wearing these shoes. Another function of the sidewalls, and this one is kind of unsaid by Adidas, is that it's there for rope climb protection if you were to use this for a CrossFit workout. And in my experience with this shoe, it did a very good job in actually just gripping the rope and protecting the outsole and the midsole of the shoe. There's virtually no doubt. I've pretty much done like 20 rope climbs in this shoe, just going as hard as I can on it. And the only area that I can spot any kind of rope burn is at the torsion system, and it's real deep, and it's very, very, very slight. So these things do work for rope climbs in terms of like durability. The actual performance of doing rope climbs it's just good enough. Like, they climb the rope, they have good grip, but they have the tendency to want to turn to the side, and that is going up and coming down. They don't ever feel like they want to fall off your feet or anything, but it is kind of distracting. Maybe I should lace these up a little bit more, but that was just something that I noticed when I was wearing the drop sets. Though all in all, I would say that these are a totally competent rope climbing shoe. So another interesting design feature of the Adidas Dropset 2 is the fact that the outsole is open at the bottom for ventilation. So there's this mesh area right here, and that is open into the interior of the shoe. And then the sock liner has cutouts so that your foot can breathe better. And I will say that these are very, very breathable shoes, and it makes them very comfortable during the summer months when it's been like 100 degrees outside. But two things about this is that you probably don't want to wear these on a rainy day. There's just no way that your feet are going to stay dry if you wear these jumping around in puddles, running outside during the rain. And then the second one is that you can actually feel the holes on the insole on the bottom of your foot, and it can be a little distracting. If you have sensitive feet, it might bother you. And honestly, it's not that big a deal to me, but it's worth noting that you will definitely feel them there. So like the original drop set, the offset on these shoes is a 6mm drop. I don't have the stack height with me. And another good thing about these shoes is that they're not overly heavy. They kind of just fall in line with everything else. I got a men's size 10.5 at 13.1 ounces. So when going to size your Adidas Dropset 2s, I'm gonna recommend that you go with your typical Adidas size, or if you don't have any Adidas shoes, just go with what you would wear in your Nike shoes. For me, that would also be half up from what I wear in my Reebok shoes. If you were looking for a training shoe with a lot of toe box volume, then you have found it in the Dropset 2s. There is a ton of toe box space with this shoe. Plenty of space at the metatarsals. I never noticed any kind of rubbing or extra tension in the metatarsals, especially on my right foot that has the bunion. And another thing that I really like about the toe box on this shoe is that there's a lot of space on top of your toes, so it never feels like something's pressing down on your toes. The width actually extends throughout the whole shoe too. The mid part of the shoe is also very open, so if you have wider feet, collapsed arches, that's gonna be extremely comfortable for you. And even the ankle collar on the shoe has plenty of adjustability options, so that if you had a lower instep, you can lace lower down. If you wanted to, you could use a runner lock on this shoe. If you wanted to just forego that top lace, you could probably do that as well. There's a lot of customization with this shoe. And overall, I found that it fit more comfortable than any of the other shoes that I've been testing at the moment. The one thing, like I said before, that might be off-putting for you is the fact that the heel is a little bit high. It's not super turned in or anything. It's also not turned out. But if you have, I guess, wider ankles, that might be problematic for you. So despite the way that these shoes look, they actually lean more on the flexible side. So even though they weigh like 13 ounces, which is a little bit on the heavier side for me personally, I didn't think that they ever felt like they were a heavy shoe or even a clunky shoe because of just how flexible they are. The forefoot cushioning on the shoe is very comfortable. It's not mushy, it's not soft or anything. It's actually more on the responsive side, but it's soft enough to give you impact reduction against things like multiple batting movements if you're doing longer sets of double unders, if you're a forefoot striker when you run, or when you're doing box jump overs. The heel cushioning is the more dense cushioning on the shoe, but I didn't notice that it was that harsh either. So impact on this shoe felt good, and I never felt like my feet became uncomfortable while using these shoes. That being said, even though these shoes are more on the flexible side and the cushioning is ample, I thought that these were still very stable lifting shoes as well. I think a lot of that has to do with the way that the outsole is shaped and how much ground contact that you get from it. Because it's so flat on the shoe, it feels like you were connected to the ground with every jump, with every landing, with every squat. I thought that the only thing that I wouldn't really use these shoes for, and that's because they do have a slightly higher drop, was deadlifts. But for Olympic weightlifting, I thought that these were extremely responsive. These are a shoe that I was able to put on and just go and hit my snatches, hit my clean and jerks, and not really have to think twice about what was on my feet. The way that the pitch is that it feels more like an Olympic weightlifting shoe, though you don't get quite as much of a heel on this shoe as you would an Olympic weightlifting shoe. You still are able to produce a good amount of force through the forefoot of the shoe because of the extended contact points and the way that the shoe is pitched forward. And at the same time, I never had any issues finding full foot contact with these shoes on. Another reason these shoes are stable for lifting is that the grip on them is excellent. Whether it's on a dusty gym stall mat or on my platform, I never was at a loss for grip with these shoes. And using them in comparison to the Metcon 9s and Nano Fronings, I thought that these were the best in terms of sheer grip. So if you look at the back part of the shoe here, you'll notice that there is a pretty good amount of midsole foam back there. But that is the more dense area of this dual density midsole. And in my experience, I didn't notice that these were ever too soft or mushy, but I also didn't notice that they were too harsh either. The amount of heel contact that you get in the shoe is excellent because of just how flat it is and the fact that there's absolutely like no heel rocker with these shoes. So when squatting with them, I felt completely locked into place, and I found that it was really easy for me to produce power. These to me were as good of a squatting shoe as the Metcon 9s, and probably a little bit better than the Nano 13 Fronings that I was also testing at the same time. And so far, there hasn't been any lifting movements that have given me issues in the Dropset 2s. So the Dropset 2s retail at $130. A couple years ago, that would have been the training shoe norm, but in 2023, that's actually on the cheaper side of training shoes, with the Metcon 9s being increased to $150, Nano 13s at $140. The Dropset 2s are a bargain in comparison because you're not skimping on any performance. You're actually getting better flexibility. These are the better shoe if you're looking to do body weight movements, you're looking to run in your training shoes, but also doesn't sacrifice really anything in the way of stability and lifting performance. The Metcon 9s probably still have a little bit of an edge when it comes to lifting, but when it comes to running and bodyweight movements, the Dropset 2s are far and beyond better. The same thing goes with the Nano 13s, which are still probably a little bit better for lifting. We're talking about the normal ones, not the Froning 13s. But on the flip side, these are also better for running and your bodyweight plyometric movements. The only thing that I would be worried about with the Dropset 2s is the durability on these shoes, because they are a pretty new shoe and they really haven't been tested all that far. The one area of concern is the upper fabric, because it reminds me a lot of the Speed TRs, and the Speed TRs were notorious for tearing. It's kind of that same material. But until that happens, I can't really say anything about the durability of these shoes. They still look pretty good in like the month and a half that I've been testing them, with rope climbs, dragging them across the floor, doing pretty much everything in these shoes, they still look relatively new and aren't really even all that dirty. Now, another weird thing with these shoes is that they kind of just dropped without any kind of marketing. And if I was Adidas, I would get behind that. I would tell the world that these are available. I would make some kind of marketing to tell them what these are all about and what they're for, because as they are, no one really knows about them. No one really knows what kind of training they're meant for unless you were to actually just kind of pick them up, or unless you were to like watch like a reviewer. But to me, the Dropset 2s are actually one of my favorite training shoes this year. They are such a sleeper because Adidas didn't really say anything about them coming out. And I think that they perform just as well as any of the other top dogs. You really have to try these shoes out. They're extremely comfortable. They're good for running, surprisingly, and they are also surprisingly good for lifting. So if you guys have any questions about the Adidas Dropset 2, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And as always, guys, please hit that like button, subscribe, and thanks for watching.